There is a strange moment that comes after the noise ends. When the screen light fades, when the notifications stop, when you finally sit in the quiet, at first it feels like peace, and then slowly it begins to feel like loneliness. That's not regression, that's clarity. Because once the noise disappears, you start to hear what was always there, your own thoughts, unfiltered. And they don't always sound comforting. The silence after detox. Most people think digital detox leads to peace, but neuroscientists describe something different. A period of post-stimulation emptiness. After long-term dopamine saturation, the brain's reward system doesn't immediately normalize, it crashes. Dr. Anna Lemke calls this the dopamine deficit state. It's when the brain, deprived of constant novelty, interprets stillness as loss. So when the noise stops, your brain asks, "Where did the world go?" That's why quiet feels hollow before it feels healing. You're not lonely because you're alone. You're lonely because your mind is adjusting to a quieter signal. The brain's reaction to clarity. When external input fades, your brain redirects energy inward. Functional MRI scans show that during silence, the default mode network, the part of the brain linked to self-reflection and identity, activates. It's the same network that lights up during daydreaming, nostalgia, and existential thought. But here's the paradox. Clarity often feels heavy before it feels light. Because clarity doesn't just reveal peace, it reveals confusion, regrets, unprocessed emotions, and forgotten ambitions. Silence holds a mirror up to the self, and most of us have been avoiding that reflection for years. The loneliness of seeing clearly. When you start paying real attention, you notice things you didn't before. The conversations that feel shallow, the work that feels hollow, the routines that don't actually fulfill you. This is the loneliness of clarity, when you realize how much of life was built to distract you from yourself. It's not that people vanish when you wake up. It's that you stop confusing connection with contact. You stop mistaking activity for meaning. And once you see that clearly, it can feel isolating. Awareness separates you from the crowd, not because you're superior, but because you're awake. The social cost of awareness. In a hyper-connected world, clarity can make you feel disconnected, because clarity breaks the rhythm of collective noise. You might notice how most conversations orbit the same loops, trends, complaints, consumption. Once your attention heals, you begin to crave depth. But depth is rare in a world optimized for speed. Psychologist Dr. Sherry Turkle calls this the solitude paradox. We're constantly connected, but increasingly alone. And when we finally disconnect, we face the loneliness that's been waiting under all that connection. The science of quiet loneliness. Neuroscience reveals that solitude activates the insula, a region associated with emotional awareness. That's why silence often makes you feel more, not less. But when emotions surface faster than your ability to name them, it can feel overwhelming, even painful. That's why people describe post-detox silence as emptiness. It's not emptiness, it's exposure. You're not empty, you're just hearing yourself again for the first time.
From loneliness to depth. Loneliness and solitude are not the same. Loneliness is the fear of being with yourself. Solitude is the ability to stay and listen. When you endure silence long enough, something shifts. The discomfort turns into curiosity. The static becomes space. And in that space, creativity, empathy, and focus reappear. In one Harvard study, participants who practiced 20 minutes of daily silence for 8 weeks showed measurable growth in the hippocampus, the brain's memory center, and a reduction in the amygdala, the region tied to anxiety. In other words, silence literally rewires your emotional balance. Relearning how to be still. You don't overcome the loneliness of clarity by filling it again. You overcome it by staying. Try this. Morning check-in. Before touching your phone, ask, what am I actually feeling right now? Not what you should feel, what you are feeling. Evening reflection. At night, write one sentence that starts with, today I noticed. The 60-second pause. Every few hours, stop, breathe. No music, no screens. Let stillness become familiar, not foreign. These micro-practices sound small, but they expand your tolerance for clarity. The identity shift. When you start living slower, you meet versions of yourself that didn't have space to exist before. You discover how much of your personality was built in reaction to noise, to please, to perform, to respond. Clarity strips that away. At first, it feels like losing something, but what you're really losing is distortion, and what remains is authentic attention. The freedom within solitude. Silence isn't isolation, it's intimacy without distraction. It's what happens when your mind finally sits beside itself and says, I see you, and you're enough. Because clarity, at its core, is not about perfection, it's about precision. Seeing what is truly there, no more, no less. And maybe what we call loneliness is simply the space between the person we were and the person we're becoming. So if you've reached a place where the world feels too quiet and you don't know what to do with that stillness, don't run from it. You're not broken. You're adjusting to honesty. The loneliness of clarity is the birthplace of meaning, and the silence you fear now will soon become the language you think in.